just get to a little bit about me so we can go. Okay, so this is me. I'm not going to bore you with too much of that. I am a dinosaur, people. I actually turned 60 in April. So, and it's funny because I actually saw a TikTok the other day where college students were talking about what age people born after the year X were considered old. And it was like 1990, 1980. And I was like, oh my God, I am a dinosaur. So, anyway, but I have been doing this for almost 30 years. I sit on 5 different medical admissions committees. I have been reviewing and working with kids for years. Did I do that or did it do it on its own? Um, Anyway, I have counseled thousands and thousands of students. I worked for over 15 years at a D1 institution where I actually ran our pre-health program. But more importantly, I'm an MD and a PhD, but the important part is that MD part because I've been you, okay? I've been that person who has pinned my hopes and dreams on getting into med school. I was also that person who laid an egg on my first MCAT, went back, revisited, did really well, but also understand the power of that, but more importantly, have been through that process, gotten accepted, and then now sit on those committees watching students as they come through. And it's kind of been a double-edged sword because over time, the requirements, the expectations, what we're looking for from students has changed astronomically. We've added more prerequisites. The weight of the MCAT has become more important, which is like torture anyway. The value of paid and hands-on clinical even stronger. But the expectations for service, research, et cetera, continue to grow. And so we always talk about getting into med school. Like, you guys are all bright. You knew you were going to get into college. But going from college to med school is literally, and I say this all the time, like going from college athletics, where I was a D1 athlete, to going to the pros. And it just really doesn't happen. It's so much more competitive. And so the average acceptance rate is about 40%. And every year I look at people who get very, very fixated on, I want the perfect personal statement. Doesn't exist, by the way. Getting their experiences, and they're putting their all in into their primary, but they forget that this is not like college. You don't submit your application and wait for the acceptances to roll in. There are secondary applications, there are the interviews, and every year I watch people year after year invest their all into their primary application, which truly for most med schools is the screening for where they are. They're going to screen on your GPA and MCAT, then they're going to look at your experiences, which is truly quantifiable. It spits out a grid of the metrics of wherever you are, and it makes a determination of your readiness in terms of the core competencies. But those secondary essays, people burn out, they start to rush them, they get overwhelmed. And what you don't understand is that those secondary essays provide the nuggets for med schools to go. And there are a lot of committees that I work on that really make their decisions on the people who make the screens. Then we look at their secondary essays, and that is where we determine a lot of our judgment on who we're going to offer interviews for. So especially, and we're going to talk about this in the process of it, but I watch people who get really burned out, and I don't want to use the word lazy, but it's exactly what it is with the question of why this school? And they put fluffy words in there like the great curriculum and the chance for hands-on exposure early on. I'm pretty sure that's what all those med schools do. And don't elicit or reference specific parts of the school and how it ties into their own personal experiences. So to us, that's a level of laziness. You haven't looked into the school. You just checked us off and sent us our money, for which we're very grateful for, but not the people that we're going to want to interview. And then when it comes to the interview, your secondary essays and what you embody in those, how you talk about your experiences, your hurdles, your life experiences, going through that process and thinking about it gives you nuggets that you will talk about in your interview. And time after time after time, we see people with beautifully written primary and secondary essays, whether or not they got help, but then get into the interview and truly have no grasp of what their brand is and how to articulate that. So that's really what I want to kind of share my wisdom with my experience mainly, honestly, working on these committees for so many years and the pitfalls that we see over and over. So, yes, I have an MD. I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill. My background is reproductive health and family planning, specifically family medicine, OBGYN. I have a master's in education, and my PhDs are in physiology and pharmacology. People do not be impressed. I didn't want to get a job. School was a great place to bide my time. I spent years working for the World Health Organization before going into counseling and advising students, while still holding research programs in Zimbabwe, Haiti, and Ghana. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk about the stuff y'all need to know. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about where we are in the AMCAS process. So by this point, hopefully everyone submitted their AMCAS or their ACOMAS or Texas applications by mid to late May, depending upon when applications open, at the latest the first part of June. You've got your MCAT scores in or are awaiting retest, so everything is in and you've all been verified. Now, about 85 to 90% of schools now automatically generate secondaries. So when AMCAS opened to schools the end of June, there was a huge influx of schools who already had their secondary essays ready and they came out. Other schools were still tweaking their secondary responses, but then sent them all out. But if you carefully read the fine print everywhere, it says if you do not meet our screening criteria, be that MCAT, GPA, background experiences, whatever. Some schools have requirements for clinical hours and research. Others have GPA minimums or MCAT minimums where they electronically screen and then hand screen too. And it says if you don't meet our screening, your secondaries may not ever be open. So be very thoughtful in that process. A general guide rule, and we'll cover all of this later on, is that you want to aim to return your secondaries within 2 to 3 weeks of receiving them, unless the school specifies differently. So one of the schools that I work for requires that you return them within a week. So make sure you're reading, prioritizing, and organizing. Treat and street the ones that are simple and easy. Send us your money, fill in this biographical information, call it a day. Do other ones that are easy to turn around. And hopefully, like most of my students, you pre-wrote some core essays so you can rinse, wash, repeat, treat them and street them and get them out there. Then your top tier schools, the ones you want to focus on, you want to dedicate time to those after you've gotten the early ones out to really focus on these well-crafted essays. Some of your more long shot or lower priority schools, you may put a little bit behind. For any automatically generated secondaries, we want to hopefully have them all returned by the first part of August. Now, osteopathic and Texas schools have already started sending out a large component of those. So you also want to get those back in. A lot of my students are already receiving DO interviews. Those will come earlier because of a smaller application pool. So we're going to talk more about how you write and approach these secondary essays. And then we're going to talk about interview tips and the nuggets I have to share, especially after last year. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to get a poll because I really want to know who I'm working with and kind of where you guys are in the process. So if you would not mind, please respond and let me know if you've already applied, which means your application is in flight. You're getting those secondaries. That's where we are. Or this upcoming cycle, meaning the cycle that we will be 2025, 2026, or future cycles in the future. And if you could just let me know, Nicole, kind of where we are. And by the way, I want to thank you so much for addressing me as Anita. My last name's kind of funky. It's Paschall, rhymes with rascal. Everybody goes Paschall, and I am not French. But I don't come to Dr. Paschall. I come to Anita, and if it bothers you, call me Dr. Anita. But I am very low key, and that's what I prefer. All right, how are we looking over there with our survey?
50% already applied, 8% next application cycle, and about 12 this upcoming cycle.
Perfect. So
Mostly already applied.
all of you guys. And this is all relevant to everyone. So you can close the poll and I'm going to keep on rolling. So let's figure out sort of where we are in our checkpoints, or what are we? So what are secondary essays? So they are traditionally school specific essays targeted on information they want to know, but also really trying to figure out, have you really explored our school? Have you visited our website? Have you listened to information that we have about us? Have you done your research on MSAR, et cetera? All right. So when will I get these? We've already talked a little bit about that. So secondary essays, now because of the number of applicants, with the average school getting around 10,000 applications, we used to screen through those. We were very thoughtful. We only, like at Chapel Hill, if you got a secondary essay, you used to know you were getting an interview. It's not like that anymore. Literally every program I work with automatically generates secondary essays. These will typically come out from the day that AMCAS opens, sometime within to like the first or second weeks of June. July. A few of our schools are still running behind on writing their secondary essays, but you should expect to receive most automatically generated secondaries by the end of July. Osteopathic programs, aside from those that accompany the primary application, actually do tend to screen more and send secondaries to students that they are targeting, which is a good thing. Now, I have gotten a couple of questions this week from people who have gotten emails from schools after having their primary verified and secondaries going out, sort of saying, you might be a good fit for this program, or how about here? And a lot of people go, but my name's on that. These are almost always automatically generated secondary responses, not based on their screening. Why does it keep doing this to me? Not on the, I'm not even touching it. My hands are up here. Not based on screening, but more often based on ethnographic or other types of content. And I'll give you an example. So my grandmother is full-blooded Cherokee Indian, and which makes me 1/4 Cherokee Indian. And so my children are 1/8. You can actually mark that your relation, your descent, up to 1/16. So my son and my daughter both checked on their applications that they were American Indian. Now, if you saw my children, they are pale as the driven snow, blonde hair, look exactly like their father, look nothing like me. So my son literally waltzed into one of his interviews, blonde hair, blue eyed, pale as a piece of chalk. And the guy actually said, and you're American Indian. That is actually an illegal question because you can't question what somebody had put, but he received requests from Yale, Harvard, Washington, St. Louis, programs he knew he was never going to get in, but it was because of those demographics. Now, the changes in affirmative action and things like that are going to slow that down a little bit, but schools are still recruiting on that. So that's where you may get some of those, but secondary essays can come from you anywhere from the time the applications opened well into January and beyond. How much time do you have returning these? We said your target should be 2 to 3 weeks from receiving them unless the school specifies differently. How long are the essays? The average schools send between 3 and 5 essays, and they can be anywhere from as little as, and some of these are hard, like 50 characters or 50 words, or 100 to 200 characters, which is like a couple of sentences. The average is about 250 to 500 words, or between about 1,200 and 2,500 characters. And that is typically including spaces. And again, typically 3 to 5 essays. This is what I always caution my students about, because they'll go, I want to apply anywhere that will accept me. And I'm like, okay, 25 schools, 4 essays per school. That's 100 essays in July. Are you ready for that? And we see, and I'm already seeing with some of my students, how the burnout and the fatigue sets in. So be very thoughtful. What can I do to prepare for them or before I receive them? We always recommend, and for those of you applying next year, what we typically do is, once I've gotten everybody's personal statement and experiences and reviews done, and applications open in May, I'm like, get this stuff keyed in, get them off and ready. Then starting mid-May, we start pre-writing core essay responses. So like COVID, gap year, hurdles you faced, working collaboratively. This year, we're seeing AI essays. Oh my God, they may be the death of me. I am hating the AI essays this year. Not the writers of them, just the prompts. But you can pull core essays. You can pull the essays from prior years, look at the schools you're applying to, look for overlap between those essays, and build a core essay between 250 and 500 words that you can then either expand or cut back on. And that is a great way to be proactive in getting your essays done. And my folks who did this are definitely paying for this very well in spades. And I've heard so many of my students were like, it annoyed me, you harassed me, but I am so thankful I pre-wrote those essays. So very, very common themes, as we've already highlighted, are diversity and uniqueness. And I'm going to tell you across the prepared and know what you bring to the table. So diversity can be in part, it can be your family's background or heritage. It can be your upbringing. It can be related to your upbringing, be that in a very rural or restricted area or in an area with highly underserved populations. It may involve international travel via a study abroad or personal travel where you have stepped outside your own comfort zone and exposed yourself to cultures or people different from yourself. And I get this very often from people. So we talk about the term, white bread, middle class America. What diversity do you bring? That can be more difficult because you may not have that heritage or background or wherever you are. So that then becomes, what have you engaged in outside of that travel? How have you been involved with underserved, underrepresented populations? And the importance of this is because, number one, schools want to know how you're going to fit into our class. So we're really looking at the diversity and enrichment you're going to bring to our class, but also in your future practice, the ability to work with people who are different from you. And that is the most important part. Everybody who walks through your door, the majority of the people who walk through your door, are not like you, do not have experiences like you, and you need to be relatable. So that comes in forms of things you've engaged in, background, hobbies, interests, travel, etc. Pull from all of those. And again, this is what creates your brand. What about your background or your experiences create your brand? And diversity is a key one of those. Why this school? I'm going to tell you, some of you guys who work with me have already gotten it back from me in spades. I am so tired of hearing about this school's mission statement, which fosters early clinical experience as early as the first year. People, there ain't a med school out there that doesn't do that. When you're talking about why this school, it is important to talk about why you were attracted to this school, but more importantly, demonstrate your research. So you may talk about my engagement with underserved populations, volunteering in X, Y, and Z free clinic where I witnessed da 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 da, or I engaged in, which makes me particularly excited to join your school's blah 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 blah. You want to reference programs, you want to reference curriculum, you want to reference clubs, you want to engage with the community setting, and you want to reference any type of affiliation you may have with the program, be that family members who graduated there, living there previously, family located in that area. All of those things go to why this particular med school. Do not be lazy and invest your time in this. With all of my clients, we do a school list breakdown. And as one of the steps that they are expected to do is to specifically list 2 to 3 reasons why this school, and those who did it are so appreciative. Personal challenges and moral dilemmas. Every time you read a secondary essay question, you need to stop and go, why are they asking me this? And my group has struggled with this more this year than historically in the past. And I'm not sure if that we're thinking we're seeing some of the first results of COVID, where maybe people didn't have as much opportunity to bounce information off each other or whatever. But we actually just had the National Academy meeting for health advisors, and there was literally a seminar on how the heck do we counsel Gen Z students who cannot find their way. And that is not the reputation that you want to create. And we often joke that our students, and it's been hotter than Big Jiminy around here. I often joke that my students could Google their way out of Hades, but cannot Google for an answer. And so when we're talking about a personal challenge or a moral dilemma, think personal challenge. They're looking at how you're going to handle adversity. Med school is tough. It is grueling. It is exhausting. It is extremely rewarding. But I'm going to tell you, the first year, if people told me now, and I've said this time and time again, if you told me to keep my MD and my license, that I had to repeat my first year of med school, I would probably take my diploma off the wall and hand it to you. I hated it. I truly, truly did. Second was better because you do organ systems. Third and fourth year, you're actually applying what you're doing. And although exhausting, it's what you've been working for. But when things get tough, when you're drowning in the content, when you're feeling overwhelmed, and I can tell you, I don't care how smart you are, you're going to feel like the dumbest person in the room. My parents told me before my first midterm exams, my first year of med school, they actually contemplated coming and taking me out of med school because they thought I was going to implode, because I thought I was a complete idiot. And then I took the first midterms, I aced them all. I was like, okay, I got this. And then I was fine. But you cannot crumble in the face of adversity. And I've actually had students say, I've never really experienced adversity. Well, more power to you, but you need to be able to articulate how you successfully face challenges and overcome them. Moral dilemmas are much like the Casper and the preview exams that people are taking now. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, because lots of people have been, I did really well, I bombed Casper and preview. We put very, 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 very little stake on these. Where do these come into play? If people look good on paper and completely lay an egg in their interview, we can go, well, can they hold themselves together? Do they make well thought out decisions? Or if you come down to two clients who are virtually identical, it gives us a little bit of insight into their thinking. I personally actually prefer preview over Casper, because Casper is humanly scored by different individuals on each question, whereas preview has a more metric aspect of it. But in general, please don't sweat those. But moral dilemma is looking at how you approach ethical situations. It's very much kind of an MMI type scenario. And then additional information, this is your opportunity to first look at, okay, what questions have they already asked me? Have I already addressed all of that? If so, and you don't feel like you have anything else to add, perfectly fine to put in NA. If they haven't had a why this school essay, perfect time to do it. If you have a weakness in your application, this is a good opportunity to explain that. That may be something related to an MCAT score, be that you had a personal tragedy right before you took it, or something happened test day and why you were retesting, or if you have other attributes that you feel offset it. The key thing to know is, number one, deal with it quickly if it is a hurdle or a negative in your application, and always, 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 always take any negative and put a positive spin on it and on how you learned or grew from it. Other things you can add here are, if there wasn't a diversity essay, if you have a particular strength or a unique aspect of your application that you want to highlight, this is the perfect place to do that. So review the questions, review what you think you wanted to talk about, and then expand on it there. Okay, moving on. Post-college activity, it is always important to have the gap year discussion. It is very important, if you are a reapplicant, be able to prepare to discuss how you had weaknesses, how you addressed them, and how you did them moving forward. Most important relationship, and this is interesting because this is kind of reflective of who is influential. And we often get the question of who knows you best, or what would they say? Most commonly, people say their parents, but you need to be able to back up why. I lost, and I'm going to try really hard not to cry. Um, but I lost my father very unexpectedly. But more important, the loss of my father and how that happened has actually made me, I think, a better physician. And let me explain. Okay, so my father and I, best friends, we grew up on a farm. He was the epitome of what you would want a father to be. My parents had a level and dedication to service that I cannot explain, and is actually what I wrote my part of my reflective of my own personal statement in med school about. And he was almost 90. My parents were 2 weeks shy of their 69th wedding anniversary. And my parents had actually been, and this, you could use some reflection like this in your essay. My parents had been to McDonald's for a Saturday breakfast with their old cronies, which they always did. And my father said he didn't feel quite right, and they actually took him to the ER. He spent the entire day in the ER. Series of tests. They initially thought he had maybe had a small stroke, turned out to be just an old residual little infarct area. They'd worked him up all day. He'd been there for about 9 hours, was doing fine. And the doctors came in and said that they didn't think there was anything, but they wanted to keep him overnight for observation. And my father said, "No, I want to go home." And they said, "We really do not want you to do that. We feel like we need to keep you here for observation overnight." And my father asked for them to leave him alone with his wife. He spent almost 15 minutes in deep conversation with my mother. And as we kind of watched from the outside without intruding, he then took his hands and he literally traced for almost 5 minutes every centimeter of her face, as if trying to commit it to memory. And my father, who had laid on his back on that gurney all day, looked at my mother, told her that she was a strong, independent woman and she would be fine. And then my father turned on his side and he passed. And he was a DNR. They were older. He didn't have major health problems, but both of them said they did not want life sustaining components. And I'm pretty sure that night that the physicians who cared for him went home scratching their heads, uncertain of what had happened. But for us as a family, my father passed on his terms. He was very tired and he simply let go. But my parents, in 69 years of marriage, had not spent one single night apart. He stayed with her when she delivered. When he was in the hospital, she stayed with him. When she had surgery for her cancer, he stayed in the room with her. And that night, that woman who had never slept apart from this man in 69 years had to go home to an empty bed and figure out how to go forward. My father was one of the most sustaining examples in my children's lives. To this day, they continue to reference things from their papa. I, at 60, got my first tattoo, which was his initials on my wrist as the guiding light that still guides us. So, back up how that important relationship has guided and taught you in your life. And I swear to you, there is not a day that I don't reach for my phone to call my father. Who are people in your life who forever have embodied grace, strength, and the way to conduct yourself? So when you're writing these essays, you want to try to move the people who are reading them. And you need to be clear, but also concise. You need to give examples. You don't reference things that people not reading them would have no idea what you're talking about. So just like you did in your personal statement, sit back down and go, somebody who doesn't know me, would they know anything about this? And that's kind of where that comes in when you're talking about research or academic awards or acknowledgments. You've got to put it in context so the person reading it can understand. So let's move on to talk about a little bit more about other things that we would do. What are your long-term goals? Now, we get this one frequently. What do you want to practice? And this is a slippery slope because you want to have some idea of what you're interested in, but you also don't want to walk in going, I'm going to be. And those who have worked with me know this. I speak to you guys out of experience, not to be judgmental. Okay. I'm trying to keep y'all from making the same mistakes I did. So I was wet behind the ears thinking I knew everything because throughout college, I spent 4 years working in a burn unit and I was an MA that thought I knew everything. And burn burn treatment. I was going to be a plastic surgeon and I was going to do burn treatment. And I wrote my personal statement and I went into my interviews. I am going to be a surgeon. Pick me. I'm going to do plastics. And I spoke to this my entire time through my interviews. And I got into med school and I got to my third year rotations. And my first rotation was surgery. And they gave me plastic surgery. And my first surgery was a 15-hour reconstructive facial surgery, plastic surgery assignment. I have never hated anything so much in my life, ever. And then I was like, well, this is great. Hate surgery. Now what am I going to do with my life? And then I did OB and was literally knocking people off call to take their call because I loved it in a way I had never shadowed an OB. So here's the thing, when you're talking about what you want to do, always approach these from the type of setting, be that potentially based on what you know, and always qualify that based on my current shadowing experience and things that I have gained interest in. I think that I would like to work in an academic setting where I would have the opportunity to engage in research while teaching, or I would like to work in a private practice setting in a rural area similar to what I grew up with. Based on the current areas for which I have exposure to, my current interests lie in, but always qualify that with an acknowledgement that you realize that that is the purpose of med school, to gain that exposure and that understanding. Personal insight, that's always good to give more interest into your background, your setting. UCSD has a 6,000 character autobiographical sketch where they ask you to talk about your upbringing, your background. Guys, if you don't even apply to UCSD, I recommend going through that exercise, because almost every med school in an interview, one of the primary questions is, tell me a little bit about yourself. And everybody thinks that'll be the easiest question. By hard. Tell me a little bit about yourself and why medicine are the hardest. And every time I ask this question, I see more Bambies standing in a headlight waiting to get hit by a semi than you could ever imagine. People approach it like a regurgitation of their application, which is what I have no interest in. I can read that stuff. Give me insight into yourself. I want to know about your family. I want to know about your upbringing. I want to know about what happened during your early childhood. I want to know some funny, interesting things about you. All of these are segues, because the thing is, and we'll talk about this in the interview part, people people approach interviews like they're trying to get 100 on their Gen Chem exam. Like there is the perfect right answer. There is, well, there are definitely wrong answers, but there is no perfect answer. It's not 2 + 2 = 4. It is how you go beyond that and create your brand and your uniqueness about you. So when we're talking about personal insight, when we're talking about qualities or characteristics, I want to know how you demonstrated compassion. I want to know how you understand the hurdles other people have faced. And when we talk about your most important activity, which by the way annoys the crap out of me, where med schools in their secondary essays will go, talk about your most important clinical activity, talk about your most important this, talk about, when you have 3 most meaningfuls, that is a way to get your secondary money, but it is an opportunity for you to expand beyond the 1,325 characters you got. So we're not expecting you to come up with a completely new most meaningful. We're expecting you to expand up beyond that. All right. So we talked about this earlier. Survive and advance. Come up with a game plan. So treat and street the ones that are easy to get out. So first of all, hold off sending secondary essays to the most competitive until you've weeded out a few of the lesser ones, or ones that you can easily treat and street. If these are your top choice schools, then focus your energy on those. Okay. Reply first to the schools that ask questions that are just basically about your background, that you can pay your money, move on, and get them out there. Outline your secondary essays before you get your first ones going. And this is where, if you want to go through, and I often have my clients do what we call an applicant strengths document. And that's where you literally go through all of your attributes in class, your clinical, leadership, academic, service, and social attributes, and outline the key components about your research, about your service endeavors, about your teaching, so that when you get different questions, questions, you can pull from those to use them. All right, so here are my tips for writing great secondary essays. And then let's get to the interviews because I definitely want to get that. Read and answer the prompt. And I can't second part enough. If you don't answer the prompt, all parts of the prompt, you might as well have not even submitted your secondary because that is one of our easiest ways to weed something out. If it says, tell us about our curriculum and outline the tracks that you would be most interested in, or if it says, tell me about a time you've done X, Y, and Z, and you talk about something completely different, it can be the most well-written essay on the planet, but if you don't address the prompt, you're already 2 feet in the ground. Do not repeat topics. Okay. Don't, and I get this a lot. If an essay says 500 words, that does not mean write 500 words. That's our limit. Oftentimes, we'll even put that in there to see how much you ramble on. Answer the prompt and then shut up. If you've answered the prompt in 200 words and it gives you 500, stop. We don't count words. We don't count characters. We count correct answers. Okay. Same on the other side. If it gives you 500 characters, don't write 700. It literally cuts off your response, and then you look like you can't follow directions. If you used an experience in one essay for the same school, don't try to use a different one again. Now, if you've referenced it in a personal statement or your experiences, it is a perfectly great time to expand on that. But for the love of B Gemini, don't repeat the same thing you already wrote in your personal statement and experiences that says, hey, look at me, I'm lazy. You can write out general themes prior to writing to prevent this repetition, but when we're already in this point and we're trying to treat in and street them, you may not have time for that. Again, stay within the character limit. It is important that you demonstrate you can follow directions. Schools often provide a box that will allow you to exceed the character limits, but cuts it off. It's exactly the same thing with AMCAS. Be clear and concise. Oh my gosh, how much I hate rambling. And guys, do just like we did with personal statements and experiences, please never, ever, ever start a paragraph with I. Try to limit the number of times you start sentences with I. Even if you go, additionally, I did, or quickly, I was able to, or whatever. Always try to talk in an active tense. Avoid using 3 and 4 word character statements instead of something else. So instead of saying I got, and I know sometimes we're trying to save characters, but I'm going to tell you, I hate I got at a level I can't explain. I know that texting, and we talk in smaller verbiage when we're texting, but you want to talk in a more professional manner. So I had the opportunity to gain experience through blah, 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 blah. Um, I look forward to bringing these skills to further enhance blah, 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 blah. So look at the words that you're using, but definitely avoid the overuse of the word I. All right. I say this every year, and every year I get panic statements from people who have used the same content from one essay to another for another school, and that's all perfectly fine. But if you reference the school, make sure to change your schools. I can't tell me how many years people at Chapel Hill have told me how much they want to go to Duke or to Wake Forest or wherever they are. So just make sure when you scan back through it that you are very careful of copy and paste. It's not going to eliminate you from consideration, but it's a pretty much aha moment to us that we know what you did. Again, check your character count and be prepared to be flexible. I know when you start getting tired and burned out, you're like, I could just use this essay, so I'm just going to copy and paste it. Copy and paste and then decide if you need to tweak it a little bit for the school. Be yourself. Guys, be yourself in your secondaries, be yourself in your interviews. It's amazing how often I can do an interview prep with somebody or just an onboarding call, and we're just going along and we're having a great conversation. And then you ask the first question and it's like, oh my God, I can't answer. Be yourself, take a breath, know and own your strengths, and be able to tell a story and to be comfortable in what you're doing. Your secondary essay should be an expansion of what you put in your primary, and more importantly, an expansion of you. So be consistent in what you're writing. All right. I want to use this last time before I start taking questions, and I'll run a little bit over if we need to talk about interviews. Guys, and this is just the general list of it all. Let's talk about first about the fact that your interview starts the minute you walk through the door in-person interviews or the minute you come on screen. Now, I'm going to tell you that most schools now are going to offering either virtual and in person. If you have the opportunity for an in-person interview, I know it is more convenient to do virtual, but every single time do an in person if it is offered and you can make it happen. I know that it may cost more or whatever, but sitting in front of somebody versus behind a screen, it's irreplaceable. I am very frustrated that some schools have gone to Kiera Talent type interviews where basically you come into a room and it's on a screen and prompts come across the screen and you're supposed to answer them and they review them. I'm very frustrated with schools doing that because we're interviewing people to work with people and we're making decisions about who's going to be the future doctors by not ever meeting them. I find that to be lazy. Sorry, it's a reflection of post COVID and what some med schools have found an easier way to do. I've also known some schools that are going to, we're doing conversational interviews where you're with like 5 other people and you have conversations with people. It allows us to interview more people. It tends to make some people a little bit more comfortable, but I also feel like it sets some people at disadvantage. But I don't make those rules. But when it comes to the interview, first of all, how you look and how you dress. Okay. So you want to be you, and by the way, guys always ask me this. If you have a beard or you normally wear a goatee or a mustache, you don't need to shave that stuff. Make sure it is well groomed. I actually caution against it. If it's what you regularly wear, there will be discolorations in your face from where you are. That'll be more distracting. It is perfectly fine to have that. If you have excessive piercings, I do recommend taking those out. It is, I have a nose piercing. I never removed mine. It is not necessarily required to remove that, but you do need to look professional. So for guys, always suits. Ladies, always a suit. If you don't own one, invest in one. You can buy them secondhand. Make sure they are tailored. Okay. Guys, typically we say gray, blue, black in that order. Okay. My son actually bought gray and blue. I tend to stay away from black. It looks kind of more mortuary like, and gray and blue is tended to be more professional. He had both. He tailored his shirt and his tie to each school he interviewed at. So, like when he interviewed at Chapel Hill, he wore a light blue shirt with his gray blazer with a light blue, white, and yellow tie. So it all tied together. When he interviewed at Wake Forest, their black, golden for his gray suit. And I couldn't believe this worked, but he wore a dark gray shirt with a gold and white and black striped tie. Oh my gosh, it looked so off the chart. And he said everybody in his interview commented on his outfit. Far too often, I see guys and girls show up in a dark suit, white shirt, black and red tie. Not only do you look like a penguin in your interview, you look exactly like everybody else. You want to distinguish yourself and stand out. For girls, does not matter if it is slacks or if it is a skirt, whatever, excuse me, you are most comfortable in. But if you're wearing a skirt, I'm going to tell you that at least 8 females last year, I can tell you what color underwear they were wearing because those girls were wearing shorty skirts. And if you're crossing your legs and it displays, or if you sit unprofessionally, it is the greatest way to exit yourself from an interview. For females, your suit coat, often girls wear a white collared shirt. Never, ever, ever wear a collared shirt. I recommend a straight or scoop neck blouse or cami underneath. That is because unlike guys who have these beautiful ties that hold their collared shirts down perfectly, us women, those collars are always going all kinds of place and it is so distracting. Whereas if you have this nice straight or scoop neck cami here, then all the focus is on this nice clean line. All right. For guys and girls, for guys, I generally recommend buy the suit, then pick a power tie. A power tie is something that is unique with a unique pattern or color. I say take your suit, know the school, buy a tie that if they have school colors, it ties to it, and then you pick your shirt to blend with that. Typically a pastel color, but like I said, my son wore kind of the Duke blue at his Duke blue interview and the darker gray at his, if the tie matches with it and the colors blend, it is perfectly appropriate. Now, I had somebody 2 years ago who was European. We kind of had to work with that. And he showed up in his interview, his hair completely slicked back in a man bun. He had on a black suit, a bright purple shirt, and a black tie. I thought I was interviewing Dracula. So you have to be careful with what may work for one setting may not work in another, so you want to be professional. So I typically recommend, like I said, pick the power tie that matches the school and then a shirt to go with it. Similar for girls, you want a power color. Think about what your best color is and work it. If you feel good, you look good, you act good. Girls, typically we say avoid a high pullback ponytail, but also pick something that you know you're not going to fiddle with too much. So it's raining holy bejeeminies around here. My curly hair is falling down or whatever. So typically, if I'm doing an interview, I'll do half up, half down so that my bangs are not falling in my face. And by the way, I cut curtain bangs recently. I ain't never going to do that again. But no, do you play with your hair? If so, then maybe pull it half up, half down and put it behind your shoulders. Pick what you're most comfortable with. But if you don't typically wear your hair up and back, then you're going to be uncomfortable. Wear it, make sure it looks professional and clean. In terms of makeup, wear professional makeup. Don't go with no makeup, but also don't look like you're going to the club from here. It is perfectly fine to wear eyeliner, mascara, wear a light lipstick or gloss with a small amount of blush, something so you don't look like you just crawled out of the morgue, but you also look professional. When you enter the interview space, extend your hand, do a greeting. When you come into, if it's in person and you enter the interview space, extend your hand and greet the person who checks you in. Be very cautious of when you're sitting around other people in the waiting room. We oftentimes, and I'm not kidding, have spies while we're literally sitting around listening to the things you're saying with other students. So how do you act? Leave your phone off or in the car. Ladies, if you're bringing a purse, make sure that your portfolio or any paper can fit into it. Do not bring a resume or CV. We do not want one. We will throw it in the trash can when you walk out the door. Also, if you're a gentleman, you may want to bring a portfolio that is simple for you to put any information they may give you during the day into. But you don't want to be so encumbered with that. Ladies, when you're picking shoes, please don't wear ballet flats. Okay, I know they're more comfortable. They look hideous. There is no way to make a pair of ballet flats look good. You need closed toe or nice looking shoes. Doesn't have to be so thick, but only like peep toe. You should have a small heel anywhere between 1 and 2 inches. Do not wear your hooker stilettos, as we call them. I have seen people that I'm pretty sure left and went to the club. Oh, and by the way, please don't wear cowboy boots underneath your skirt. We had a lot of that last year. I love my cowboy boots. Okay. I am a country music fan. I probably got 20 pairs of cowboy boots. I did not wear them to an interview at any point. You'd be amazed at the things people wear and do in an interview. Typically, on a given day following interviews, our first committee meeting is laughing and joking about the things we saw. Now, briefly, before I get to questions, I want to talk about the virtual interview space and how to approach all questions. All right. Virtual interviews. It is very important that you make sure that you have good lighting, good setup in what you're doing. And right now I'm struggling because I'm getting a glare off our 200-gallon aquarium. Typically what you want is a backdrop behind you that is well lit. You want to make sure that you do not have windows that cause glare. It's really hard for me because our house is almost all glass and we don't have any blinds because I live on the water and I want to see the water. But you want to make sure you don't have a glare coming through. You want interesting things behind you. I always recommend putting a large plant in the corner. If you watch YouTube videos, everybody's got a plant in the corner. There is something about green that is aesthetically pleasing. Behind you, typically you want a colorful picture. I always go, and if you can see in the background of mine, I've got a canvas image in the background. That is what I typically use when I record commercials for the Princeton Review in a different setting. It's a colorful print. It's actually our backyard. You want to set so that your head is slightly kind of to the corner of that, so it's not right in the middle of the painting, so that everybody's kind of going, what's behind you? You can oftentimes put people in things in your background that sort of represent you. So, for instance, one of my students sculpts bonsai trees, and he had a couple of his bonsai trees in the background. One of my students founded a golf clinic and was a golfer, and so he had some of his golf trophies in the background. One of my students writes music, so he had his guitar in the background. And his first interviewer actually commented on the guitar because he played guitar. So you want something that kind of references you and where you are. Please do not give me a stark white background, boring, lose it. Also, do not use a virtual background like the ones made behind. Always creates like a green screen, and you're always flying in and out of it. Finally, I want to address, and then I'm going to leave time for questions. How do you answer a question? You need to, prior to your interview, research the school, create your applicant strengths, which is go through your application and list out your clinical, leadership, academic, research, teaching, tutoring, study abroad, language competencies, service attributes, and things that you are interested in. List them out, make bullet points of what your talking points were. You can go right back to your experiences and then list 2 to 3 stories or examples that relate to all of those. So for me, if I was talking about my research experience, and I've got, obviously with my background and everything, I've got extensive research experience, but I would pull a couple of potentially humorous or stories where I learned a lot from them, or maybe how I grew as a researcher that I can reference. So I may be talking about my research and I can go, for instance, when I was conducting a study on such and such. So that's where having those examples prepared in advance. And then at the bottom, I want you to write your 5 top selling points, what you bring to the table, what's your brand, so that in your interview, as you're listening to questions, you're going, oh, that's where I'm going to talk about and use that story. And then you enter into it. So your 5 top selling points, and your goal is in your interview to give 5 things that reference those top selling points. Okay. Those selling points that you want them to remember, so that when I come back, typically we review applicants. The average for schools is about 2 weeks after where they've interviewed. And if I'm your committee reviewer and I sit down and I open the information from your interview, I go, oh, that's the dude who played the guitar, or that's the lady who lost her father and that story she told me, or whatever that will be memorable about you. And then 10 unique things about you, which are also not necessarily your selling points, because those are your strengths, but maybe little nuggets about you that an interviewer might remember, be it your background, maybe it's something that you went through, maybe something that you experienced, things that you are most proud about from your background, your upbringing, and your application. So be prepared to answer all these. And what I always say is the best way to approach any question is in this thoughtful process. So you're asked a question, and I'm going to give you an example. I hate this question, and it is, and my colleague always asks this: if there were only one spot left in our class, why would we offer that spot to you? So the 2 biggest mistakes that people make is what we call word vomit. You rush to answer that question. So it's, you should give that spot to me because I. Okay, you never repeat the question back, and you don't want to just jump into the question and give the answer and then that's it. You're done. The best way to approach it is take a breath, create a trailer. Okay, and I talk about it like in stair steps. So the first part will be take a breath, and create a trailer. So, for instance, you might say, well, truthfully, we all want that last spot, right? Every one of us want that spot. Nobody's going to come in here and go, you know, I actually met Sally out in the waiting room and I think you should give it to her. And so you're creating a trailer and you say, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to why this school works so well for me, but then also how I feel like what I could bring to this program. So let me start by so what you've done is you've told your interviewer what to expect. And then on the other side, you've sort of given yourself time to compose your thoughts in your head. If it's a clinical question, you can say, I have had such a great opportunity to acquire clinical experience, shadowing in 10 different disciplines for over 500 hours, but also through my clinical job, working as an MA in a dermatology practice. But I think if I had to highlight what is best engendered why I want to go into medicine would be, and that's where you tell your one story, because the average interviewer can't take in that much information. So that's what you want to focus on, and that's what they will remember. So those are my pearls of wisdom of how to attack your secondaries and how to make your interviews shine. Remember, interviews can count to up to 60% of your application. If you're offered an interview, that means the school says, we've accepted your GPA, your MCAT, and your experiences. They may not be at the top of our class, but if you can show yourself in your interview, you can gain that spot. So before I go to answering questions, quickly, I want to just highlight the things here at TPR we can do, and then I want to answer your questions. So through tutor.com, if you're struggling with any class that you have, we have people on demand 24/7 to help boost your grades, to help you get the GPA you need. And as you know, we're experienced test providers through our MCAT test prep, as GRE, et cetera, to help you get the score you need. And that, as we know, are the two first screening parameters. But then when it comes to helping you put forward that application, it is so much more than that. And we've already talked about it's how you write your personal statement, how you couch your experiences, how you create your brand. All of these parts, if you need help preparing for your application, come to us, my team and I am our premier counselor here, and we can help you get the application of your dreams. And by the way, if you reference webinar when you call in, we have and if you could do me a favor and post a link to the admissions counseling website, because on that website, it says schedule a consult, and you can get advice on the strength of your application from my enrollment expert. And he can tell you all about our programs and give you insight into where your application stands now. But if you're looking to apply in 2025, 2026, two nuggets I want to give you. One, we got a price increase coming in November. So ask him how you can get in now for current year price and for this year price, for the same price that our 2025, 2026 people are paying. And you can actually get that basically like 2 years of counseling for the cost of what we've got now. All right, that's all I got for that. Let's get some questions. If you can stick around for me, I am anxious to answer them. So I'm going to scroll all the way. Well, wait, do I not have any questions? Everybody, we're ready to start. We're here. Questions. I'm looking. Y'all could hear me. You could hear me. I'm scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Sid telling me I was glowing. on a tough day. This is my sleep deprivation look. We had that for a long time. All right, I'm scrolling down. Sorry, guys, because y'all was coming and going all through this conversation. Do, 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 do. Do you see any questions that I may have not come to yet? There's that's our spot. Do they ever conduct interviews in a different language if you write that you have some proficiency level in your app? They don't conduct, that is a great question. I knew you would ask that, girl. They don't conduct them in a different language, but if you say you are fluent in Spanish, and that's the one most common, fluent in Spanish or fluent in Chinese, I have had interviewers ask questions in Spanish or in Chinese. Those are the two biggest ones because a quarter of the world's population speaks each of those languages. But generally, outside of that, we don't have that happen very often. So you always want to be honest in that. But they generally understand that most people who are fluent mean conversive. So you mentioned that if secondary question overlaps with primary topics, how would I want to expand it? Some of the activities are covered in secondary sessions. So you can expand on it. So what I cautioned against was if it we don't expect them to not already be listed in your experiences. And that's why I always said, if they ask what's your most meaningful clinical experience and you put that, oh, sorry, thank you. Before you leave me, could you do me one favor before I go back to answering this? Because sometimes I don't have a brain. We have a poll question up here. And if you would like more information on our tutor.com services or our test prep, and more importantly, if you would like information about how our admissions counseling can help you with your application, be that your primary, your secondary, your whole application, or just even getting an applicant assessment, click that and somebody will reach out to you. I'm going to go ahead and let that survey run while I continue to blab on over here. So we were talking about how you help them overlap. So we're not expecting something completely new. If you've asked about your most meaningful clinical and you wrote that as one of your most meaningful in your experiences, but this is the perfect, I mean, they give you 1,325 characters. That's like 6 lines. This is the perfect opportunity to tell a story, explain on that, give more information. Okay, so I got that one. Oh, I don't have other questions. Okay, so once you get that survey down, you can take care of that. Do other people have questions for me? Hi, Bergen. I love seeing all my clients in here. Anybody else have another question? Do you see one that I've maybe missed out there? Uh,
But I'm seeing some typing, so we'll let those play out.
Type along? Yes, thank you. I don't see any. I This is one where I often don't get quite as many questions, and I tried to cover all the key questions that I thought people have always asked about secondaries and interviews, so hopefully I got a good portion of them. What's the best way to organize for admissions test prep when you also have full-time work and part-time classes? That's actually a very good question. So if you're thinking about so the two things that I recommend is if you are in school and full-time coursework, I recommend if you have the summer, the year before you're applying. So like this summer, dedicate that summer to content review, be that whether you're doing a course or you're using books or whatever. And that means I love to see people do their content review the summer before and test in August or September, the summer before they're applying in May. That way you can potentially be one and done. But if you lay an egg on your exam, like I did the first time, you'd have thought I didn't even show up. It still gives you the fall and spring to work on information to retest in like March or April. Okay. If you're not ready in August or September, you don't have to test. You can continue prepping. I'd say always set aside about 6 months to prep. Give yourself at least 6 weeks to 3 months to go through content and a roughly 2 to 3 months to do nothing but prep, do practice problems and practice tests. The biggest mistake I see people make is spending too much time on content and not enough time learning how to answer the question. The first 2 questions on your MCAT, like a squirrel could generally answer. The next 2 questions, you basically, in a passage, you basically have to have basic content information. The next 2 generally are what differentiate between a 512 and a 515 and above. And so you've really got to learn how to answer and approach those passages. And then the other thing, taking the test is, I swear to God, it's like training for a marathon. You would not get up today. I typically do 5 miles every morning. I would never get up today and go, I think I'm going to run a marathon. Now, we generally say if you can do 5 to 6, you can do a half, but you can't do a full marathon. And this test is a marathon. So you need to pace yourself. And I don't know how often I get people where I go, okay, where are you scoring on your practice test? Oh, about a 510. How many have you taken? Three. Three? Oh, well, because my son was a gunner. And he did all the TPR test and all the AAMC tests twice. He's a gunner. I never recommend that. But I recommend a bare minimum of 8. Ideally, if you can get through all the practice tests that we have, take every free test out there, make sure you take all the AAMC tests. If you are working full-time and part-time in classes, that is definitely much more a challenge. So I would definitely set aside 5 to 6 months for content review, and then a minimum, and then focus on setting aside 1 day every weekend to do a practice test. Okay. And then take your test and wait 48 hours and schedule a retest date at least 3 weeks after you get your test back, and continue doing practice problems and practice tests at an abated state until you get your score back. I hope that helps a little bit. When do allopathic schools tend to start sending out interviews so that you can get a few options for timing? Planning on a 4-day trip in mid-August. That could be dicey, but don't want to shoot myself in the foot. Great question. Okay, so DO schools start sending out interview invites typically in July and August. MD schools start reviewing most commonly the first part of August. I have seen MD interviews come in as early as July, especially for Texas school, but mainly later August and the first part of September. The earlier in August, the better. 4 days should be okay, as long as one, you're checking your email, and two, you typically have the ability to schedule them a little bit it out. People who are doing prep with me, I need at least 2 weeks before your first interview. And the reason is you need enough time to prepare and work from the content I give you in interview prep, but also you don't want too much time so you forget everything. Would I be able to work with you for secondary, and how do I sign up to receive help on the writing and additional schools? Okay, so we have packages for secondary prep. We do have not advertised on the website Premier Secondary help. And you can buy interview prep, and you can buy just secondary prep. Should you talk about hurdles in your secondary essays? Absolutely. They are such a great demonstrator of your ability to overcome and go beyond. So, circumstances that prompted an F in a course, although a strong student, those are very, very important to reference. Now, I never ever say, never talk about 1B or 1C or whatever, because I just look like you whining. Okay. My ex-husband got C's, which by the way were gifts, because he literally failed the classes, and both his organic chemistry still got a full ride to Duke. Okay. Those are things we don't want you to talk about. But if you had a hurdle, if you had an adversity, if you had something that led you to not do well in a particular course or in a semester, please explain it, demonstrate it, and importantly, reference the forward trend that you had going forward and how it's helped you in the future. Thank you for the free practice test also, Nicole. Maybe a little off topic, but do you have experience with dental school secondaries? Absolutely. I'm going to tell you, love my dental students, because medical people are always like, I want to help and serve and make a difference, blah, 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 blah. But my dental students, they are serious about some teeth. And I think that's because what it takes to have to work in teeth, but they are some of the most committed people. I spent years working with dental students when I was at my D1 institution. I worked directly with Chapel Hill, and their interviews and their secondaries. And I also have someone on my team who worked in the dental school at Chapel Hill as well. And dental students, I always tell this story because one of my favorite dental applicants who played soccer at NC State came to our interview prep, and I was like, so why dentistry? Because I hate teeth. I couldn't think of anything worse other than working with feet that I would want to do. And she was like, see these teeth? And she had the most beautiful set of teeth I've ever seen. And she's like, they've been like this my whole life. I made my daddy get me braces. And my dental Barbie, hold on a second, reaches in her pocketbook, pulls out this dental Barbie that she's had since kindergarten. She's like, I carry her with me everywhere. And I went, let's not take her to your interview though. But they are serious about some teeth. So I love my dental applicants. There's our med school counseling where you can sign up for a free consult with Garrett. Yay! That looks like everybody. We only went to 10 minutes over. Hopefully, I've gotten to everybody's questions. If you have more, reach out to Garrett. Remember,